Welcome to a special bonus episode of The Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. In this episode, we meet Tracy Hermans, Director of eCommerce, L-Space by Monica Wise, and Casey Guy, Senior International Business Manager, MANSCAPED. Both from the Oktoberfest Executive Leaders Keynote Panel, how bold guesses and happy accidents help digital and wholesale teams work as one team. You can register online for Oktoberfest with a link in the show notes. In this sneak peek panel preview episode, you'll learn about Tracy and Casey's background, their two-start, one-stop advice for brands and retailers who are now engaged or considering engaging in cross-border commerce, and get a sense of the fantastic discussion that happened October 1, 2020 at Oktoberfest, where I will also be moderating a global growth showcase panel on the Canadian market featuring SAXX, Canada Post, and Passport Shipping. Let's hear now from Global E-Commerce Leaders Forum co-founder Kent Allen, who will set the stage for us.
Hello and welcome to a podcast preview with the Global E-Commerce Tech Talks. I'm pleased to have Tracy and Casey join myself and Michael LeBlanc, who's the moderator for the Global E-Commerce Tech Talks. Today we're previewing one of the sessions that I'm especially excited about. That will be coming up Thursday, October 1st, so next Thursday. This session will start right after our keynote. Tom Davis from Cartier literally zooms in from Switzerland with a provocative view on the future of global retail. So without further ado, would love to kind of introduce Tracy and Casey. I'll let them both introduce themselves. Really quickly, the title of this session is How Bold Guesses and Happy Accidents Help Digital and Wholesale Teams Work as One. With that, I am going to turn it over to Michael LeBlanc, and I will fade to dark here.
All right. Well, thanks, Kent. Great introduction, and looking forward to kind of a quick preview. So why don't we jump right in? Tracy, why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your current role, and the brand that you work for and represent.
Great, thanks. I am over at L-Space by Monica Wise. We are a swimwear and a ready-wear apparel destination. The brand has been around for a little over 20 years and founded and based in Southern California. And I head up the e-commerce side, the D2C side of the business, and work very closely with Debbie Martin, who is the head of wholesale. And we're happy to talk about more ways that, we've learned and collaborated, especially within this pandemic and some of those changes that have accelerated during the times. Happy to share more into detail.
Oh, fantastic. All right, Casey, over to you. And I guess the title of the session, there's no such thing as a happy accident in your world, but tell us about what you do and who you are and all about your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Casey Guy, and I'm the Senior International Business Manager for MANSCAPED. And at MANSCAPED, we focus on male grooming, male hygiene, specifically below the waist, where we target. So it's a really interesting and innovative company. And yeah, that's basically our focus. And again, I focus on international expansion.
Let's kick it off, Casey, with you. Tell us a little bit about, in our fun format here, 2 starts and 1 stop. Your advice to the folks listening to the podcast of things they should start doing if they're not, and things that they may want to stop doing. And again, that could be something you've just observed in general that people do when it comes to cross-border and thinking about international. So 2 things they should start doing based on your experience, whether it's pre-COVID or during the COVID era, and then 1 thing that maybe they might want to reconsider.
Sure, absolutely. So I think a good one is from a regulation standpoint, it's not super sexy per se, but really taking the time now to make sure that you've kind of got the nuts and bolts of a good regulatory team. And I'm talking from a tax perspective, from certification perspective, really getting that in line right now maybe there's more time to appropriate to it. And what you get out of that is huge, because you can move so fast sometimes, even in the current situation we're in, that you don't want to go too far and then have to look back and clean anything up. And I've just observed that in maybe a couple companies out there. And I'm happy just in the way that MANSCAPED has approached things. They've been really solid in that. I'd say a second one is really investigate shipping opportunities. We've all experienced some real pain in the last little bit from an international standpoint, obviously with, air shipments, the cost of just moving product around. We found, it's forced us, obviously, to look at like the dollar spend that we're putting into things, but we're finding some really innovative solutions out there from some real common carriers, and just, solutions of consolidated pickups and single clearance through customs and things that are really designed to help your business, but maybe people haven't looked at them in the past. So I'd say those are two starts.
Yeah.
Stops would maybe be, from I recognize this isn't, I'm not trying to just say everything's great at MANSCAPED, but everything is great at MANSCAPED. But it's I've noticed this out there too, that especially in this time too, there's this need to always be bringing out a new product or a new product category. I think right now is a time for people to maybe be a bit conservative on that, and maybe do a bit more review in regards to what the real need is, from not only from your own profile of products, but also like what is really needed out there right now, or what is the market willing to accept based on the current state of affairs in the world.
Well, that's a great insight. In other words, be careful of the line extensions, because the environment is dynamic enough. Focus on the core and get the core right, and flawless execute before you go into too many line extensions. Maybe that's always a tempting thing, right?
Absolutely,
is come out with a bit of news with the latest and greatest. Well, that's great. That's a great insight. Thanks for sharing. Tracy, what about you? What are the things that you recommend that people who are doing e-commerce, cross-border, looking at international markets, that they start doing?
Yeah, I think for us, it was really telling to be able to accelerate our D2C side of the business, and looking at a segmented approach across our geo and different regions. We saw that as more people were shifting to online to make their purchase, we had opportunity to just, as you mentioned, go deeper with our consumers that were in our core markets, looking at that dollar spend and looking at it from an acquisition perspective, and just ensuring that, during the times that, for instance, different beaches were open in our domestic market, and when our East Coast side of the business was a bit more in lockdown, different regions opened, our messaging had to pivot, ensuring that it was relevant to each market, but also that we were working with our retailers for what they were able to ship, what they were able to take, and then flexibly work with them on the returns. So I think for the D2C side of the business, it was both segmenting our market, segmenting our product, as well as ensuring that we were able to aggressively go into acquisition where it made sense for us, and it was relevant. So I think that was one really critical takeaway that we're continuing to do, especially now on the West Coast as well. So I think that learning has helped us with being a little more thoughtful in our approach, with all the changes or affairs in the world that are happening right now, that we've been able to be more agile in the business. That also affects our marketing, our brand and social channels, just being sensitive to a lot of the changes that I think happen every month. It's really dynamic changes that happen every week.
Right down to the regional level, right? As you said, it's a great insight, because it's, I do think that if there's a ongoing second wave of COVID, that it's more regionalized, not national. And then that creates a lot of need for being very nimble around moving product and messaging and understanding, flexing to the market conditions wherever you're shipping to, right? Exactly.
And we found that it's a very difficult time right now, I think, for a lot of brands who the customer discovery, some of the touch points are on social. And, this is a sort of a second point where we talk about relevant messaging and make sure that our messaging is sensitive, but also aware with a lot of the cultural and social activism that's happening. We want to make sure that we're listening, that we're relevant in the same way to our core consumers, and we're not pushing product in a way that's too direct. We hear a lot of brands saying, quote unquote, we're in this together. We were one of the first brands to identify that to our core consumers that we don't know or have a plan because it's the first time it's happening to all of us. Yeah. I think that having that honest expression and transparency in our messaging made us as a company feel better because we addressed that, this is really the first time for a lot of us in experiencing changes. And so I think being able to be dynamic and pivot in our messaging, those two takeaways, while I think it's very obvious, it's a consistent sort of learning as every month unfolds a new kind of challenge in this environment.
I don't think it's so obvious, actually. It's actually a really great insight, that kind of, as many brands try to understand everything from messaging to logistics to operation in a very dynamic time. There's not just one thing going on. There's 4 or 5 things going on at the same time. I mean, in some ways, what you described is a good guideline for what you probably shouldn't do as a brand. But anything else come to mind that you see people doing that you might, based on your experience, say, hey, you know what? I'm not sure that's going to work for you. Anything jump out at you?
Yeah, I think for me, from my experience, I found that pulling back out of it just depends on your position. Each company is different. I think we benefit from having, really senior executive team that's experienced in retail, but also trusts their team to make decisions. And I think when a lot of brands were pulling back on their media spend, and partly because of the uncertainty and wanting to ensure that their retention channels, for instance, were more resourced, I guess you could say, or they were preparing to ensure that they were secure from other, financial means. We went heavy in our acquisition, and I would say that I think that was smart because where a lot of brands were pulling back on platforms like Facebook or even Google, for instance, for paid search, that just allowed us to increase our brand relevance, our positioning. Right. And some of those gains that happen, it just happened to time with our high season. Some of those gains that happened, I don't know if you can really retract and go back. There are just so many factors that were happening at the same time. Now, for instance, the CPCs, the CPMs are so much more, they're much more costly because I think people are catching on that this online shift is not necessarily a temporary thing. And I think that we benefited from having low CPCs during that time, and we were able to, have a much more favorable cost per acquisition during the time. So I would say that the thing to stop doing is to not necessarily to make the risks where you can, but to stop sort of doing what other retail or brands do, because it's really easy to follow in that moment.
Well, and it's easier said than done, which is part and parcel of why we do these Oktoberfest, because we get thought leaders like both of you to kind of help articulate lessons learned. And so let me just go back quickly to you, Casey. What are you going to be talking about on the panel? It's happy accidents. Again, not something I think of when I think of manscaping, but boom.
Good lead in.
That's, you see what I did there.
That's great.
Yeah, but anyway, give us just like a top line. What are you going to be talking about on the panel, and what are you going to be talking about?
No problem. We'll be discussing, and I'll be discussing in particular, kind of how things have shaped up within the construct of COVID and operating. What are the constraints, and what are some of the advantages or things we've been able to take advantage? There is a slight silver lining, and how do we pivot? Like, what has that meant to us from an operational standpoint, an inventory standpoint, and then how do we keep some of those successes going? Because we all know this is going to shift out of this at some point, but we want to be, we want to continue to be prepared to take advantage of what we can at the moment, be sensitive at the same time. We've really got to run an interesting line there. And then also look to the future in regards to how we're going to carry on and move out of this, hopefully wiser and more refined. So that's where I'll be focusing.
And Tracy, from what you said around basically the culture of the organization and the way you thought and approached the crisis and opportunities, that kind of resilience, tell me a little bit about what you'll be sharing on the panel.
I think in terms of the way that we approached it from a brand positioning, as well as inventory position, I think we monitored it very closely. I think from the moment we were in lockdown, again, I really can't say enough. Like, I think our executive team sort of predicted some of the next steps that could occur and how we would be in a position where we had either too much inventory or we needed to turn it faster. Just, monitoring the levels each week, ensuring that we had the right channels, the right relationships in place. I think also we benefited from having a really strong customer with a very strong and healthy CLV. We early on, we didn't want to be too sales heavy in our messaging, and we wanted to be mindful of the environment, and so we spoke more to brand. We launched brand campaigns. The campaign "What's Your L?" Identified as the L in L space, and we tried to engage more directly one-on-one with our consumers. I think that allowed us for more time to be able to delay launches, for instance, to look at what made the most sense, what was most relevant to push our product. I think we were able to benefit from that because factors such as a delayed stimulus check, like happening in April. And Casey, I'm not sure if you saw a similar uptick, but I think with the confidence and the consumer confidence that happened in the market once that hit households, combined with the warmer weather, the ability to go outdoors, all of these sort of macro trends, our delaying and monitoring our inventory really allowed us to be at the right place at the right time during our high summer season so that we had enough product and also the marketing was right. So I had said, it was kind of a happy accident. And one of the influencer partnerships that we had, we pushed into much later, a couple of months later than we had originally intended. And that really worked out well for us as well.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the story, and of course, lessons learned become insight for the future in the months and years to come in the COVID era. Kent, let me throw it back to you. I'm excited. I mean, this is going to be a great panel, and I really I envy you. You got a great session. So back to you, and bring us home.
Yeah, no, and thank you, Casey, and thank you, Tracy. And I should have mentioned that, Casey has joined us in the past and will be weighing in a little bit from his former perspective when he kind of spoke on behalf of Spy Optics and really ran the wholesale there. So Casey gets to be, this dual personality where we have Tracy and Debbie kind of each representing the direct-to-consumer and kind of the wholesale channels, respectively. And obviously, we're all about cross-border and international, so we'll be bringing in lessons learned from international markets and, looking forward to also talking about how both of these organizations work with influencers around the world and some lessons learned during the pandemic to date. And, big picture, what can we do during the holidays? We'll be meeting in early October, but it's never too late to try to do some tweaks for the holidays and test some things. So all of our speakers will be looking back somewhat, but primarily looking ahead to what looks to be 2021 like the e-commerce industry has never seen before. So again, Michael, thanks for grabbing a little time with us today and helping us, kind of get a preview out there. Tracy and Casey, thanks so much. And really looking forward to having Debbie join us as well next Thursday, October the 1st. We'll see you there. If you haven't registered, you can register at Global E-commerce leadersforum.com. Just go to our homepage and there'll be a big button there. Really easy. Everybody's welcome. Brands, retailers, solution providers, athletes that work with Casey's team, models that work with Tracy's team, come one, come all.
Well, thanks, Kent, and thanks again, Casey and Tracy, for joining us for this preview. And I wish you a safe week and continued success.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks so much.
Well, that's a wrap on this special Oktoberfest podcast preview bonus episode of the Voice of Retail podcast. Thanks again to Tracy and Casey for being my guests. If you like this podcast, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform, rate and review, and be sure to recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail industry. I'm Michael LeBlanc, founder and president of Emmy LeBlanc Company, Inc. You can learn more about me on www.emmyleblanc.co or, of course, on LinkedIn. And don't forget to check out Oktoberfest, the link in the show notes, and register. It's going to be a great session coming up in October. Until next time, have a safe week.